Hey guys, okay, it's quarantine time. I've been in my house since Wednesday, so I'm literally living in hoodies and shorts, But today we're going to talk about the mysterious disappearance of the Sodder children, and I just don't know why this case isn't more known or more people talking about it, because it was super sketchy when I was reading everything about it. It just seems like something that people should be talking about, or I just don't understand how it didn't get as much publicity as I think it should. So George and Jeannie Sodder were a couple who had immigrated from Italy to the United States separately. They ended up meeting in the United States, but they both had immigrated from Italy. They lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and they had 10 kids. So the oldest kid at the time was not living in the house. He was off on military leave, and so he just wasn't living with him. They did have other 9 children that were living with them at the time. Everything starts on Christmas Eve, and during Christmas Eve, it was just a time of celebration. Like, nothing had been too suspicious, even though once we get more into the case, some things that happened beforehand do seem kind of sketch and weird. But it was Christmas Eve 1945, and it's about 1 a.m. and around that time, a little bit before, Jeannie had woken up in the middle of the night, and she walked because the phone was ringing. She answered and she was like, oh, it's the wrong number. It's also 1 a.m. in the morning, like, who's calling? And she had seen that the lights downstairs in the house were on. So she was just like, all right, whatever, figured somebody was down there, and then just went to bed. So Jeannie goes back to bed, and a fire breaks out around 1 a.m. They wake up, and George and Jeannie get the kids and just kind of try to rush them out of the house and try to save as many of their kids as they could, make sure everybody was out safe. They only ended up getting 4 kids out of the house, and when George realized that more of his children were still inside, he ran into the house to try to see if he could save them, because he knew some of the kids shared bedrooms upstairs on the 2nd floor. However, when he went inside to go back up the stairs, the entire stairway was engulfed in flames, and there was just no way he was going to be able to get through. So he remembered that in the back of the house there was a ladder, and he was like, great, I'll just climb up and get the kids. But when he went there, the ladder was gone, even though he knew that the ladder had been there the previous nights, but all of a sudden it wasn't there. He had his trucks that were used to pack the coal, and he went to go start his truck, and they were just not starting, and he was like, I literally used this earlier in the day. I don't know why it's not working, or why it's not turning on. And that kind of seems suspicious. But one of the daughters that had survived, the older one, Marion, she dashed to the neighbor's house and tried to wake them up and have them call the fire department. But the fire department wasn't answering. Again, it was Christmas Eve. Who knows what they were doing? They could have just been, I don't know, trying to celebrate, or maybe, I don't know. So they didn't answer. So then she runs to the next house, the next neighbor's house. And again, they try to call, no answer. So that neighbor was like, you know what? Forget this. I'm just going to run and quickly drive to the fire station, because it wasn't that far away. It was actually only 2.5 miles away from where they were living. So he's like, it'll be faster if I go and alert them than to wait to see if they answer the phone. So he drives there to the fire department, and he informs the fire chief, F.J. Morris, of the fire. And here's one of the sketch parts. Again, the firehouse was 2.5 miles away from the house. It took them 8 hours to get to the house. 8 hours. That's unheard of. That's like not even real. When I read that, I was like, what? What? Like, it just doesn't seem like normal that a fire department takes 8 hours to get to a burning house that's 2.5 miles away. Again, like I said, it is Christmas Eve, so maybe some of like the firefighters had kind of snuck home to be with their families, but it was also 1 a.m. So what were they doing? It just, like, it doesn't make sense to me. You know, like, how does it take you 8 hours to get to a burning house? Like, what are you doing? So by the time they finally did arrive, 8 hours later, the house was destroyed. It was engulfed, and the 5 children that were still inside the house, Maurice, who was 14 years old, Martha, that was 12 years old, Louis, that was 9 years old, Jeannie, that was 8 years old, and Betty, that was 5 years old. So those children did not make it. It's at least so it seemed like they were not in the house. They assumed that they had been engulfed in the fire and died inside the house. And so everything, like I said, was destroyed, and although some appliances were still, you know, kind of half burnt, but they couldn't find any remains. And so the fire chief, Morris, told the family that the children must have died in the fire, and that's why they just completely burned and disintegrated, and they couldn't even find bones, which I think is kind of suspicious. Like, there's 5 of them and not one bone survives. Like, there is nothing, nothing, like not even a tooth, a bone left. It just seemed kind of strange. But the parents were like, you know what, maybe they did die in the fire. Like, what are we gonna do about it? And they believed it at first, like, our children died in there, like it was so tragic. And they had even sent out the family 5 death certificates for their kids. But the more they thought about it, so they ended up believing everything F.J. Morris told them, and he had mentioned that the fire was caused due to faulty wiring, which I think maybe at that point is when Ginny and George started to question whether this was true or not, because Jeannie was like, I woke up in the middle of the night though to a phone call, so the phone was working, and she had seen lights downstairs, so she thought that that was suspicious, and she was like, if it was faulty wiring, then, you know, why are the lights on downstairs? Why are they working? They started to have their suspicions, and then they talked to someone that works at the crematorium. So the person that works at the crematorium told them that when they cremate a human body, they cremate them for 2 hours at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's 2 hours of burning. The reports say the house initially was only burning for 45 minutes, and I very doubtfully believe that the house was burning at more than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So then the mom was like, then there should have been some bones, there should have been something. There was 5 of them. There was 5 children, and not one single bone was recovered, and the house was not burning that long in order for that extreme amount of heat. So then she, like, doesn't believe it. George doesn't believe it. And then he starts to remember, like, putting some things together. So a couple months prior to the fire, he had 2 encounters that he remembered to be kind of suspicious looking back on it. So the first time, he had met some, like, man who just told him, you know, be careful with your house, like, it could, you never know, it could, like, go up in fire. And weird. And then the most notable one was that there was a salesman who came to his door, and he was trying to sell him life insurance policy. They kind of got into like a tiff, and the man started yelling at George, telling him that if he didn't stop talking about Mussolini, that his children were gonna burn and die. And like, is that not like almost exactly what happened? Is that not suspicious? And so the salesman had said that to him because in their little town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, there was a small little Italian community, and George Sodder was known to be talking against Mussolini, and he was just like not about it. He was against everything he stood for, and he made his opinion against Mussolini known, which upset some people, like the salesman. So then, they start searching around the house and thinking of like trying to see if there was any clues of what happened to their kids, and they actually found a pineapple bomb. And a pineapple bomb is like this little bomb, but they found this pineapple bomb close to the house, and they thought that was really weird. But F.J. Morris, the fire chief, he was just not believing anything that they were saying, and he thought that they were just delusional, or not delusional, but wanting a different explanation than the faulty wiring to their house, and that they just didn't want to accept that their children had died in the fire. And so they were finding all these excuses. Afterwards, there were some sightings of the kids. So they had gotten like word that a waitress had actually seen 5 kids talking to a man, and they were all talking in Italian, and they were there for breakfast. And she said that they kind of looked like the missing kids, because at this point George and Jeannie just didn't believe the fire theory, and so they had put up posters of their kids, and they had even put up a reward if you knew information about their kids, if they had seen their kids, anything that would lead them to finding their kids or what happened to their children. They had these flyers up, and the server, the waitress, she said she saw them. And then another sighting, George had seen a picture of a girl that resembled one of his daughters, and he was like, that's her. George had seen a picture of a girl that looked like his daughter. He kind of looked her up, and he went to her parents' house and was like, I need to see her, I need to talk to her, because some years had passed, so she was grown up at the time. They would have been the same age, but the parents of the girl just denied him, and they would not let her speak to him. And I mean, that does seem a little weird, but at the same time, if some person just came up and was like, I need to talk to your teenage daughter because she reminds me or looks like my daughter, like, most people would be like, no, like, that just, you seem kind of crazy, I'm not going to do that. But I mean, it's completely understandable. But, any sighting or any lead that he had, George would follow up on it, because he was convinced, and so was Jeannie, that their children had not died in the fire. Jeannie started conducting experiments on animal bones and disintegrating them, and just testing different things that would happen to bones and animal carcasses in fires, in acid, just trying to see if it is possible that their children completely disintegrated in the fire. But all of her experiments came out inconclusive, and she was 100% convinced that there was absolutely no way that her children died in this fire. So they started believing that their children were kidnapped. And they started believing this because they hired a private investigator. They put up a billboard with their children's faces on them and saying, like, it's not too late to investigate. According to the Fayetteville fire department, it was faulty wiring. The children died there. They had issued them death certificates already. It got to the point where the governor and the state police of West Virginia had said their search was just hopeless and that they just didn't want to accept the reality that their children had died in this fire. George ends up writing a letter to the FBI and saying, like, please help us, like, this is what happened. I think my children were kidnapped. They've been sighted. And the FBI was willing to help investigate, but the Fayetteville Police Department and Fire Department said no thank you, because the FBI can only get involved if they are invited by the city or state in which a crime allegedly happens. They can trump when it's over like federal lines or state lines, because then it's a federal case. But this was just, you know, in Fayetteville, and the Fayetteville police were just like, no, we don't need your help. So the FBI, they declined the FBI's help, which is, it could be either one of two things. One, they just 100% truly believe that these kids died in the fire, and they were like, we're not gonna just waste our time and your time with investigating something we already know happened. Or two, they knew something else was going on and they didn't want the FBI investigating. So, some theories of what could have happened to the Sodder children. One is they did die in the fire. Okay, that all 5 children died in the fire. The fire was so rough that it just disintegrated the bodies and there was nothing left but ashes. That's the theory I believe the least. I don't think they died in the fire. I really don't. Another theory is that the children were kidnapped. And this theory stems, one, because when they were doing the investigation, they told George and Jeannie that the phone lines had been cut off. And so the telephone company told them that the wires had been cut. And so that's suspicious. Like, who would just randomly cut their telephone wires unless it's somebody who knew that the fire was going to go off and they didn't want the family to be able to call for help. Then there's that pineapple bomb that they found near the house, which could have caused the explosion of the house. The theory that the fire started due to faulty wiring doesn't seem to add up with Jeannie saying that she got a random phone call in the middle of the night and she had seen the lights on. So at least up till the fire started, everything was working perfectly fine. Then you have all of the sightings of the kids, you know, different sightings here and there. The children that survived the fire, the 4 remaining children, had said that they had seen people watching them, which seems suspicious because, like, why are people just randomly watching these children? Another and last theory is that this all was due to mafia involvement. And people believe this because George immigrated from Italy when he was a teenager, 14 years old, and he did not want to say why. He never talked about it. He never wanted to say what made him immigrate at such a young age and by himself to the United States. And he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't tell anybody why he came. He didn't tell anybody why he didn't want to go back. Because he had stated he did not want to go back, and just nobody knew what happened that made him want to, you know, just come and never go back. Because it doesn't seem to be as simple as, you know, I was maybe not having the best life over there and there's more opportunity here. Nothing. He just didn't want to talk about it. So some people think maybe he had some mafia involvement, or maybe he had seen something, knew something, had some type of involvement with the mafia, and those were the people that were watching the children. And maybe those were the people that kind of had a hand to play in their children's disappearance. Then there's the ladder that was missing from the house. I think that's like, so the ladder goes missing from the house, the ladder that's always there. Then George's car isn't working and it won't turn on, even though it turned on perfectly fine earlier that day. Then one of the neighbors actually ended up saying that they had seen a man late at night walking around their house. Hello. Super suspicious. Then there's that strange salesman that just yells at him and literally tells him, your house is going to go up in fire and your children are going to die. Literally saying exactly what ended up happening. And then, to backtrack a little bit, turns out that that same salesman that had threatened George was part of the panel of people in the council that had said that the fire was due to faulty wiring, and that's the result of the investigation. And he was part of this city council panel for Fayetteville. So another suspicious, just little drop. He could have had a part in not letting the FBI come and investigate. So it just all seemed really strange. So I think that the children were taken. I think that this was 100% planned. They knew that this was going to happen. So I think that 100% they were taken. I think that everything seems to add up. You have somebody threatening George, saying exactly what happened, that the house was going to burn up, their kids were going to die. You have the sightings of people saying that they saw these kids. You have a lot of people upset with George about him talking against Mussolini and everything he had to say about Mussolini. You have the kids who said that they had been being watched by some people. You have the neighbor who said that they had seen a man kind of just walking around their house the night of the fire. You have fire department saying that it was caused due to faulty wiring. However, the telephone company said that the wires had been cut. You have Jeannie, who had gotten a weird phone call in the middle of the night and saw the lights on, so obviously the power was working, at least up till the fire. Then you have that weird pineapple bomb that they found near the house. You have the testimony of the person from the crematorium who said how long it takes for a body to completely disintegrate, and that just doesn't seem to align with how long the house was burning for. Then, even stranger than anything, years and years have passed. Jeannie gets a postcard in the mail, and it's a picture of a young man, and it's addressed to her. It's the same address of the house that they were living at before when the fire went up. So Jeannie received a letter in the mail, and this for Jeannie and George was like the icing on the cake. They believed that this was the evidence that they needed, that this topped it all off. So it was a photo of a young man. It was addressed specifically to Jeannie. It had, under the photo, it said, Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie, Lil Boys, A90132 or 35. Jeannie believed that photo of that young man looked exactly like one of her children, Louis Sodder, that had supposedly either died or disappeared in the fire, and she just believed it was him. They could never trace that postcard back. It came from Italy, so that letter came all the way from Italy, was directly sent to Jeannie, and whoever sent it knew that they lived there, knew that the name of one of the children, and it just seems suspicious that she would get this picture years later. But she believed that it was her child. It could look like her child, Louis, because years had passed, and he looked like that's what Louis would have possibly looked like had he gotten to that age. Nothing was ever found. No other letters ever got sent back to Jeannie. She never found out who sent it or why. The case just kind of ended, I mean, nobody was really investigating it because, like I said, they had concluded the deaths of those 5 Sodder children as accidental deaths due to the fire. They had already given them death certificates. So for them, it was just like a closed case. They never suspected anything else. And nobody has been investigating, except for the parents who kept up a billboard with a picture of their children for years. They passed away, and only one surviving sister is alive, and she still is hopeful that one day she will find out what happened to her siblings. But that's it, guys. That's the disappearance of the Sodder children. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think that they did die, if they were kidnapped, if they were murdered, if the mafia had something to do with it. I don't know. There's so many things that seem out of place or suspicious. So let me know what you guys think, and stay safe, stay home if you can, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.